Hi everyone. I'm so excited for today's podcast because today with me we have Adriana, and I don't know, there are so many things which I can say about her. She is an all-rounder. She's an engineer, she's a developer advocate, she has managed teams, she has great hobbies like climbing, she does very great podcast. I was there in your podcast. Thank you so much. And open source contributions, so many things. I mean, so many things. So, yeah, I'm super, super excited for this podcast. Thank you so much, Adrina, for joining us today. And maybe can you tell us more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Adriana Vilela. I'm originally from Brazil, but I've been living in Canada for the last, I think almost 35 years. So I've been here for a very long time. And yeah, I started my career as a developer. I was a Java developer for 15 years, and then I moved into the DevOps space, which eventually led me to where I am now, which is a senior staff developer advocate at ServiceNow. I was actually so I joined originally Lightstep. Lightstep had been acquired by ServiceNow. It's been 3 years, I think, since the acquisition. And when I joined, that acquisition had already happened. So we were known as Lightstep. Now it's ServiceNow Cloud Observability, and I focus most of my efforts in the observability space. That's been my focus, I think, in the last 3 years. Two as a developer advocate, one as a manager.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, there are so many stuff we're going to talk about it more. You kept it very brief, but that's quite humble, Edrina. But yes, we're going to touch more topic. You mentioned about the DevOps part. I was just curious. I mean, because software industry has a lot of domains like backend, front end, DevOps, and so many part. And I'm also someone who started my career as DevOps engineer. So I'm just curious to know that when do you feel that DevOps is a thing? I mean, what really made you fall in love with DevOps, and what do you like the most about it?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. So, at the time, I was running a team. It was like a support team, an application support team. And the application that we were supporting was a vendor application, but there's like customizations that you could do. And so, um, our team kept having to deal with issues that happened in production. So basically, like these customizations, like things were never going right. Like the deployment, the quality of the code going into production was garbage. And so my team was like constantly having to like figure out what was going on and whatnot. And one of the things that I think the tipping point for me, so among other things, we also managed the releases. So at the time, I worked at a bank, and the way to do releases was you had to write a giant Word doc with detailed instructions and screenshots. And then you had to hand it off to the operations team who were responsible for reading those instructions and executing the instructions. And oftentimes, the person who did that didn't look at the instructions until the day of. So it meant that you had to pray that your instructions were correct, pray that they read the instructions correctly, and pray that they also executed the instructions correctly. And there was this one particular release where, like, it started on a Friday night. I think it went until like Sunday, and everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And on top of that, I was really sick and I lost my voice. And there was nobody who could help me on my team. So I'm like trying to manage this thing, and like I can't get on a call with the ops guys because I'm like I literally can't talk. So I'm dying. I'm like we somehow made it. I don't know how. I'm so traumatized from that. And I remember, like, I think the following weekend I was like having lunch at my parents' place, and my dad's in software as well. He's a retired software architect, and I'm like, oh my God, this was like the previous week was the most horrible weekend of my life. And he's like, you should really look into this DevOps thing. And I'm like, huh? So I started like doing some research, and I'm like, oh my God, are you telling me there's a way to automate our deployments so that we have less of a chance of making errors? So it wasn't even a thing in my team, but I was like, I was just so horrified by my experience that I set up like my own VirtualBox VM with like my own CI/CD pipeline. So I taught myself Jenkins. I taught myself Groovy to do like more complex stuff in Jenkins, and taught myself Ansible. And so pretty soon I had like this whole like CI/CD pipeline set up on this VM on my own work machine, and it caught the attention of my manager, and the team started using it. And on top of that, the bank was then standing up a DevOps practice where they're like, oh, we actually are rolling this out throughout the organization, and they wanted to bring me on as a DevOps coach. And I started on the team, and it was supposed to be a different team lead, but then I kind of started like, I guess I asked all the right questions and started taking on more of a leadershipy role. Just I wasn't like trying to like step on anyone's toes, but it just, I so eventually the person who was like leading the initiative, she ended up making me having me like lead and manage the team. So that was like my first like formal management role, and it was yeah, that was a wild ride, because now we're having to basically come up with a whole DevOps strategy for the entire organization, which it's a large bank in Canada with international presence. So we had like branches in the States. I think there were entities in like Asia, in Europe, and so having to like roll out the strategy and convince people that DevOps was something that was like awesome and important, and you need to embrace it. So because I was so sold on DevOps, I brought like my full enthusiasm into it and came up with creative ways to get people excited about it. So we did like DevOps open houses, where we had our first one was like a Halloween one. So everyone's like comes to our office space dressed up for Halloween, and then we had like different booths educating people about like different aspects of DevOps. And then we did one for May the 4th, so Star Wars Day, May the 4th be with you. So we did it at another location where one of the guys knew like some dudes who dress up as stormtroopers for funsies, and so in the full like stormtrooper outfits, and so like they looked legit, and so we did like photo ops with the stormtroopers and people dressed up as Star Wars characters. And again, we educated people on DevOps while having fun with Star Wars. So I think that was also the beginning of my evangelism career. Like just it sort of just organically happened, and I think that's why like I ended up coming up in the ranks in this area, because I started like I started asking questions. I started blogging
Mhm.
about it. I'm like, let's get people excited. So I did like a lot of internal blogging. We used Yammer internally, which is basically like
Yeah.
corporate Facebook. And so I would do posts of my blog posts, and then we started doing like road shows to various like offices throughout like North America, and people would come up to our like little booth and be like, oh my God, I recognize you from your blog post, or I recognize you from your Yammer post. And I'm like, oh my God, people read my stuff. So it was really striking a nerve. So that was like my entry into DevOps. And I feel like it was like the thing
Yeah.
that was missing from my life. Because I've always liked sort of the infrastructure side of things, but I'm also like, I'm a developer at heart, right? I started
Yeah.
with development, but I love the infrastructure side of things. And I remember after I had like a little 1 year break where I had quit tech for a year. And when I was like trying to figure out what to do next, I'm like, I wish there was a thing where I could just put my love of development with my love for infrastructure, and
Yeah.
it existed.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I think it's inspiring, and I just want to say that what you did is huge. I mean, when you mentioned, right, that it's spread over all like the Canada bank. I mean, I think it started from Canada and then it spread it over all different branches. So, I mean, if you just imagine the impact, I mean, it's huge. So, that's really amazing. That's really amazing, Adriana. And yeah, I mean, as you mentioned aptly, like now I understand your love for DevOps. I mean, I was just thinking about me, and that's how it started with me, because so I basically did electronics engineering. and I was never into computer science. And so in electronics, like whenever you have to make changes, any changes to the embedded code, and you have to burn it again and again to see those changes. And there was this foundation, like open source foundation, 4C Foundation, and they came up with this idea of setting up CI/CD pipelines for this whole hardware code. So I was
That's
like,
so
wow, this,
cool.
yeah, that's so cool, right? And I really wish to continue it, but like so many things happen, and I get less time to contribute there. But I'm pretty sure things have been improved a lot. So that's how that's how I got to know about DevOps, to be honest, because at that time I had no idea what DevOps is. But then that was the problem statement that we need to automate this process because we cannot burn the code again and again, and it's too time consuming, and doing that too on hardware is too time consuming. So that's really cool. I mean, and also I feel like one of the thing which you mentioned, that you put a lot of questions and then you really wanted to solve those problems. I think now I get it. I mean, those are the qualities maybe which led you to the manager. I think it wasn't planned, but it just happened, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly,
I mean,
exactly.
that's really amazing. Yeah, that's really nice, Adriana. I got to learn a lot through your story. So maybe I just wanted to ask you this as a next question: the biggest challenge you faced in this, the software delivery process, and how you overcame that. I think you already mentioned. Was this your biggest challenge in your journey when
I
you have to deliver something? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge, and I've experienced it a couple of times now in my career, more than a couple, I guess, is actually getting people to like really embrace that paradigm shift when it comes to like making a significant change that's going to make your life better, right? So it was, this DevOps transformation, which like people are still, resistant to it, especially in an old organization, like the place where I worked. I want to say it was like around for 150 years. Like it's an
Yeah.
old ass bank. And people are obviously people are not that old. But I mean, like, places
Yeah.
like bank, people stayed there for a really, really long time. They make their
Yeah.
entire like careers out of it. And so folks there are probably like the hardest types of people to like change their minds on things, especially when it comes to like, oh, we're here to make your life better, but you have to learn this new thing. So I think the biggest challenge was like we solved the CI problem, no problem, right? But like when it came to the actual delivery portion, the CD part, that was so hard because people are like, why do I have to learn Ansible? I can just do the stuff manually. Like you're telling me I have to like learn YAML? Like you're telling me to touch code? And these are, ops folks who like they might know some bash. I was actually surprised sometimes I knew bash better than them. I'd be like asking them, hey, how do you do this in bash? They're like, yeah, I don't know. I'm like, aren't you supposed to be like the scripting
Yeah.
experts? um, so there's like this like long-standing cultural attitude of like, why are you making me change? Everything's perfectly fine the way it is. So I experienced that in this big DevOps transformation. And I experienced that also like at another organization when I was like leading an observability team there, where I was hired to run this observability team. And I was originally like, the team was basically just managing a bunch of internal observability tooling, but they were also paying money to like a SaaS vendor for observability tooling. I'm like, y'all are already paying money to this vendor. Why are we also managing all this stuff? So I pivoted the team from like managing observability tools. I'm like, we're not managing tools anymore. Like, we're going to focus on observability practices. And as part of that, we're going to get the whole organization schooled on OpenTelemetry. And that was challenging because it's like, first of all, one of the folks I reported to was like, but we had like our monitors with our dashboards at a previous job, and that worked great. And I'm like, that's nice, but it ain't gonna work here. And on top of that, we're like trying to get the engineers to instrument with open telemetry, and they're like, yes, open tracing, we use open tracing. I'm like, it's not the same thing. But open telemetry was still pretty new at the time, so this was back in 2021. And so traces wasn't even in GA. And so I'm trying to convince this organization that like open telemetry is going to be a big deal, but traces isn't even in GA. And I actually had to rally a couple of folks from the open telemetry community from two different vendors who came together and did a Q&A for the people at the company to sort of calm their fears. And I think like that was one of my favorite things, because I'm like, holy crap, this tells me the power of this community, that and we were actually like looking at potentially switching vendors. And so we were doing POCs with both vendors, and these two vendors like put their vendor differences aside and came under the umbrella of open telemetry to come talk to us, not as vendor people, but members of the open telemetry community, to answer questions and just sort of kind of calm those fears. And I thought it was so great to see that. And I think that was like for me the indication of like, yeah, I my gut feeling on open telemetry is totally right. And I feel like I was right, because open telemetry is the second most popular CNCF project behind Kubernetes in terms of contributions. So there you have it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, you mentioned about the power of community, and with that, I was really interested to know more about open telemetry, as you were mentioning, and the story which you mentioned. I mean, how they came together, and they really it really supported you. That's amazing. I mean, can you tell us more about the whole open telemetry thing, because as you co-lead the open telemetry and user working group, so maybe can you tell us more about it and about the community? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So OpenTelemetry was born out of the merger of two existing open source projects, which were Open Tracing and Open Census. And so, and the creators of OpenTelemetry were very deliberate too, to make sure that there was backward compatibility with Open Tracing and Open Census, so that it would make it easier for anyone who's instrumented their code with either of those frameworks to basically go and move into open telemetry relatively easily, with the caveat, obviously, like eventually you should move to like pure open telemetry so that you can take advantage of like all the latest features and make sure that any CVEs are addressed and all that, right? Because those projects are now retired. So it came about from that. And because back in the day also, like every vendor was kind of doing their own thing. So the way that the vendors distinguished themselves was through their own instrumentation libraries and also through their product. And now we are speaking this common language of open telemetry. Every vendor is ingesting the same telemetry data. So what differentiates you as a vendor? It's how you render the data, what you do to sort of provide additional insights with the same data that you're all receiving, which I think is really cool. And one of the things I love about open telemetry is that there's this piece called the collector, which is basically like it's used to like ingest telemetry from multiple sources. So think of it literally collects telemetry from multiple sources. It can do some additional transformations, and then it can send it out to multiple destinations. And so you can basically send the same telemetry to like more than one vendor at the same time. So if you're like, hey, I don't know which vendor I should go with, let's try both
That's
and
right.
see how it goes. You do a vendor bake off. And for me, like the first time I tried that, I'm like, no way, this is the coolest thing ever. Like, yeah, just mind blowing. So that's open telemetry in a nutshell. And then I'm part of the OTel end user SIG. So we were a working group. We were recently converted to a SIG. I'm one of the maintainers on there. And we basically create this bridge between end users and the OTel OTel community. So first of all, we connect end users to each other so that they can see like, hey, what do other end users do? So we do that by we do like OTel Q&A, which is like an interview style thing where we learn how you use OpenTelemetry in your organization. So we usually we record those interviews on Zoom and pop them onto YouTube. Then we have OTel in Practice, which is folks in the community. It's like a meetup style thing. So folks in the community will share, an awesome thing that they learned about OpenTelemetry with others. Again, we put the recording on the OTel YouTube. But then we've also been running some user feedback surveys so that we can bring that back to the folks involved in the OTel community, like the maintainers, the governance committee, et cetera, so that this feedback from the users can actually help drive the work being done by the various SIGs. So the first one that we did this year was one of the maintainers for the OTel Collector SIG came to us and they're like, hey, we would love it if you could provide some feedback, can run this survey so that we can drive, the further development of features in the collector. And so we did that. We also did a discussion panel. So we actually did I want to say about 4 users who are actual users of the collector. And we did like a little roundtable discussion so that we could get direct user feedback. So those were like the two main forms of feedback. So being able to bring that back, like really bridge that gap between the users and the folks who are actually, doing the work in OpenTelemetry is so important, and I think is what keeps the project going. And the other thing that I want to mention is the thing that I love is like the folks in OpenTelemetry in general, and I see this too with the end user SIG. We all work at different companies, but so we're like all competitors, and actually it's a mixture of like observability companies and also end users that make up various various SIGs, various working groups of OTel. And so like a lot of us are competitors, but we put that aside. The community is very mindful of making sure that no one vendor is like promoting their stuff, like and I've even been like, there was a blog post that I published where I wanted to show what it looked like sending it to a couple of different vendor backends, and they're like, well, we really want to keep it vendor neutral, so can you just make sure that it, give an example of like it's sending to an open source tool. And it's like, what, that's I respect that fully, and I think that's what keeps it friendly. And that's how it allows us to like check our egos out at the door, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, to be honest, I had no clue about the end user groups, and I was like, all the time I was confused that what exactly the work happens. But I think you explained it very beautifully. So, moreover, it's like the product feedback. You basically help with the product feedback to
Yeah.
all the developers and maintainers. And sometimes maybe so that's a big part contribution. I get it because I remember like back in 2022 or 21, I used to use Grafana, and then we used to use Grafana in our teams, and we had like so many things. We wanted so many features, and we wanted so many improvements. And even for the Tecton project, I remember. And then I used to basically go to their Slack, and we used to talk to their engineers, and it's kind of a product feedback. And then we saw different features coming up. So it's really cool. I mean, I think that's something like me going there. I think you're bridging the gap, basically ensuring that it happens in a very good way. And I think it's wonderful. This is a wonderful thing. So do we have more working groups, Adrena, other than OpenTelemetry? I'm just curious. I mean, it's a part of
Yeah,
CNC. Yeah.
yeah, like
Yeah.
within OpenTelemetry or outside of OpenTelemetry.
I mean, within OpenTelemetry and also outside of telemetry.
Yeah, I
And
think within OpenTelemetry, there's like one for Prometheus and OpenTelemetry interoperability, which I came to know about that group because they actually approached us because, Prometheus is so popular, especially like in the, in the monitoring world. And so, and OpenTelemetry is now like, one of the signals that it can deal with, manage is metrics. So how do we ensure that OpenTelemetry and Prometheus play nice with each other? And it's kind of this reciprocal thing because I think Prometheus can now also ingest OpenTelemetry format metrics, which is the OpenTelemetry format is OTLP, and OpenTelemetry can ingest Prometheus metrics as well. So making sure that we have that compatibility, but also like the survey that was run recently was around just making sure like what's a format that we can all try to agree on. So that's one of them. I think I can't remember the names of all the various working groups, but there's like, I mean, if you can dream it, it probably exists, kind of thing. I mean, there's even, I don't know if it's a working group, it might be a SIG. Like there's like work being done on bringing OpenTelemetry to mainframes. There's a focus now on mobile OTel. Like we all use our cell phones, so let's make sure that there's observability for our mobile devices. Who'd have thought? Like those things. When I was at Two Cows, I was managing the observability team there. They were a huge Perl shop, and so one of the questions at the time was like, is there OTel support for Perl? And this was like 3 years ago, and I think there's like some movement going on in that direction finally. So yeah.
I think it's going to be very helpful. I mean, the one which you mentioned about the mobile. I mean, if someone wants to, yeah, it's actually helpful. If someone wants to see the things in runtime, because obviously mobile is something which everyone is using, and I'm just thinking that it's going to be really helpful. Yeah, that's amazing, Adriana. So, I mean, if someone wants to basically contribute, so how? I think it's all open source, right? The end
Yeah.
user group. So if someone wants to contribute, I mean, how can they basically start with this?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I can give some tips. I also wrote a blog post about this because I'm like, I don't think we have that information out there necessarily. So first of all, like start you can just like come and lurk in on like, some of the either the SIG meetings or like join one of the channels that interests you on CNCF Slack. All of the OTel channels start with OTel dash, so they're pretty easy to find. Like I said, I feel like there's a channel for everything that you can dream of. And so like, yeah, just lurking in that way, a great way to get started if you want to contribute, like pull request contribute. Some people might be scared of contributing to open source. I know I was. So I've been in the industry for like over 20 years. And my first open source contribution was like 2 years ago. And I think that's like the case with a lot of people in my position. Like I grew up in large enterprise, where it's mostly closed systems, and so this idea of like contributing to open source is so foreign to us. So for me, I'm like, oh my god, I don't want to contribute code. I'm like putting myself out there. You're very vulnerable when you submit a PR. So I made a contribution to the OTel docs. And especially like if you're a new user to something, like, my God, the best way to help out is to contribute to the docs, because if the docs aren't doing it for you and you discover how to do it better, like I've been in a position previously where I discover how to do it better or write a blog post. Awesome. That's
Yeah.
great. It's very self-serving and it does help other people. But I've gotten into the habit now of doing that, but also making sure I contribute back to the docs, because
Mhm.
ultimately, especially for these open source projects, like we want them to be the source of truth, the single source of truth, for finding information on a topic. So you find a boo-boo in the docs, you go and submit a pull request, and the folks in OpenTelemetry have been nothing but nice. No one has ever given me attitude on a pull request. It's always very thoughtful comments. Everyone's super polite about how they give feedback. So don't be afraid. So the docs are a great way to get started. Another way I would say, the end user SIG is another way to get started as well. Because especially if you're an end user and you're trying to like figure out open telemetry in your organization, or you've used it for a while and you want to connect with other folks, what a great way to like, join our SIG meetings, and you can participate by either being part of OTel Q&A or doing OTel in practice, or maybe being on one of our user feedback panels. And what else? There's the OpenTelemetry Community demo. So it's basically it's like the hipster shop, if you remember the Google hipster shop, but for telescopes. So basically multi-microservices written in different languages, all instrumented with OpenTelemetry. So now you can see, hey, my favorite language is Ruby. I want to see how stuff in Ruby is instrumented with OpenTelemetry, and so you can see an example there. And I think the demo, I want to say it was launched, I want to say around KubeCon, KubeCon Detroit. Yeah, 2021. It was launched just before then. And it's like grown so much. It does so much stuff now, and they're always looking for contributions. And you just go into the repo there and look at whatever issues that they have open, and see if there's something that kind of interests you. I made a contribution to the OTel demo back in the day, where I added some metric stuff for Python, because I think metrics were just becoming, they were just finalizing the metrics specification. So I was like, it was my tiny little contribution, but nothing's too big or too small. Like, I feel like that's an easy way to do it. Or like just readmes, also like the repo, the readmes for the various repos. Like I've done a couple of talks on the OpenTelemetry operator, and I don't think I'm at the point where I can contribute code to the OTel operator, but I've done enough. Like I've done a few talks and a few blog posts on the OTel operator. And so as I learned about it, I realized, oh, there's some stuff missing from the readmes. So I've taken it upon myself to like also contribute to the readmes and blog posts too. OTel folks are always looking for blog posts. There's a variety of blog posts. There's ones that are feature announcements. There are ones of like, end user case studies, just anything interesting about how to use OpenTelemetry. Great way to contribute. Yeah. There's so many different ways, and you don't have to necessarily like go off the deep end and start, writing some like super complex code to contribute.
Yeah. That's really helpful, Adriana. And I think like most of the people struggle with the starting point, and I think you've mentioned it very nicely that docs, blog post, and also the feedback. These could be the starting points. If you're using OpenTelemetry, if you're using any of those stuff, you can just give your feedback, or maybe you can just write a blog post on how you're using it. I mean,
yeah,
that's the great way to start with open source contribution. And also like joining the channel, attending those weekly and bi-weekly meetings it's one of the best way. And because this is one of the questions which I hear so many times from so many folks, that how do we start? And I guess like attending the meetings, consistency and being patient, and then contributing, that's how it happens. And I can also maybe paste all the links which you mentioned about the Slack channel, and different maybe the GitHub repo and different things. Yeah, yeah. We can just paste more about it. And do we have like weekly meetings or something for the OpenTelemetry SIG, as you mentioned about the SIG meetings?
Yeah, so for the end user SIG, we meet every 2 weeks. We
Okay.
met last week, so the next one is next week, June the whatever the Thursday is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, some SIGs meet weekly, some are bi-weekly. You can subscribe. There's like I'll send you the link as well. Like for there's like a page where you can see the OpenTelemetry calendar, and you can subscribe to either the whole calendar or to, and then you'll get meeting invites for everything. Or if there's like a particular SIG that interests you, you can subscribe to just getting the calendar invites for that particular SIG. And like you don't have to necessarily be a participant in the meetings either. Like you can just sit there and just listen. And that's perfectly fine. And same with the channel, and the Slack channel in some ways is like, if you ask a question, it's a little less scary because like you're just an avatar. So there's a little bit more anonymity to a certain extent. So don't be afraid of asking questions. Like I had a couple of KubeCon talks where I had to like learn stuff for the talk, best way to learn stuff is to like write a CFP, get it accepted, and then learn it for the talk. And I remember, so I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to keep bugging these hotel operator people, but I have questions and I need them answered. And everyone's like so nice about answering my questions. It's so great. Even though every time I post it, I'm like, oh my God, please don't hate me. But I mean, that's what they're there for. They want people to like use the thing that they're working on. And they want to make sure that people are understanding how it works so that it can be used, right? And if you don't know how it's used, then it does a disservice to everybody.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, with this, Adriana, because you mentioned about the CFP thing, and I wanted to ask you around this because this is like this is a question which a lot of people generally come up with. I mean, they are so much afraid of putting up the CFP and going there and give a talk. And I know that you have given a lot of talks at KubeCon. So maybe, I mean, one question is that do you need to be an expert in that particular topic to always, uh, apply for the talk and then just give it on the stage? I mean, a lot of people have this, fear that you have to be an expert and then only you will have to apply and then only you have to speak. So, I mean, what do you think about this? Yeah, what's your perspective around this?
Yeah, so oftentimes, and this is talking from various people in the community, like sometimes they'll write an abstract on an idea that sounds really cool, and it might be on something that they want to learn about. And so if the talk gets accepted, it's a great way to force them to learn stuff. And for me, I'm like so grateful for that. It's been such a great learning opportunity, a forced learning opportunity. And like again, you don't have to have the talk already written to
Yeah,
apply for that CFP. Like, just think of something that's interesting to you that is within the realm of doable. Because I mean, there's like tons of interesting topics where I'm like, oh, I wish I could learn more about that. But it's like, if I get accepted, will I have time to learn about it? So really ask yourself, what's within the realm of doable if you do get accepted for the talk, especially if you haven't written any content on that on that topic. The other way to approach it is like, I sometimes turn blog posts into talks. So I already have the material and it works out great.
best
So if I
way.
get accepted, perfect, because I already, like I pretty much have like my speaking points already. So that's another way to approach it. But don't be afraid, and apply often. And you'll get better and better at applying. Like I look at some of my early CFP submissions, because like previously when I had done talks, it was like either internally for work. So this whole like CFP process was like, there's no such thing, right? Because you're asked to give a presentation for work or talk about whatever, no problem. But then like in this world where you have to write an abstract for your talk, you have to be really thoughtful about it, because you need to be able to convey. I think your abstract needs to be interesting. So it has to be an interesting topic. I think it should be interestingly written, which is very hard because often the abstract, I think, has a limit of like between 800 and 1,000 characters, depending on what the CFP is. And the abstract needs to convey, like, what are you going to talk about? Because sometimes, like, I've reviewed a number of CFPs as well. So I've been lucky to have been on a bunch of program committees recently, which has been very educational for me, because I'm like, oh, these are the things that I'm looking for if I'm reviewing. So it makes me a better CFP writer, I guess, as well, because I'm like, okay, this person has like provided no details. So I literally have no idea what they're going to talk about given this abstract. And then the CNCF CFPs have this additional section that you won't see everywhere else necessarily, which is what are the benefits to the ecosystem.
Yeah, yeah.
And that one's a really important part too. And honestly, like the first time I saw it, I'm like, oh my God, now I have to come up with some bullshit for this. And it's like, you know what? No, I think it's great that they have you outline it. I think it really serves a purpose, because it's a way for you to elaborate on what you're talking about. And like, really, like, why are you doing this? Like, what is it really addresses, like, what is the point? Because the abstract is like, what are you going to talk about? And I think the benefits to the ecosystem is like, what's the point, and gives you opportunity to elaborate on things a little bit more, which I think is great. And so if you're submitting a CFP and you give me like one sentence of like benefits to the ecosystem, to me it feels like you haven't really thought about it
It's
too
a big
much.
no.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, big no.
I'm sorry to say, and I'm not the only one who shares that opinion. Like I've seen other people, express similar thoughts. It's like really put a little bit of effort into that. Like that section is there for a reason. Take
Yeah,
advantage of it. So yeah,
because it makes sense. I mean, because I think it this way, because eventually you have to go to the stage and you have to basically share your learning experience to the community. And if you are able to pre-process it through your CFP, that how could be your talk actually be beneficial to the community, you could actually give a better talk. So I
yeah,
guess it's in the same direction. But yeah, Adrina, I mean, this is really helpful, the tips which you gave around the speaking. And I think what I can conclude is, correct me if I'm wrong, is that what I feel by your thoughts is that you also believe in this process, that giving a talk is more about sharing your learning experience rather than being rather than showing off the expert thing, which a lot of people confuse, because they think that you have to be an expert and then only you can apply. So it's rather more the learning experience. Basically, you're just going there and you're sharing the learning experience with the community, and the community is also asking the questions, or maybe just telling you how to do it better. So I guess it's if we keep it that approach, it's simpler to
yeah.
apply.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's more approachable that way too, because it's
yeah,
like and I think that's why my blog posts resonate with so many
yeah,
people, because oftentimes they are a journey of my learning, and I will often say, "Well, I tried this and it totally didn't work, and this is why." And I think if people see that vulnerability, I think it's very relatable, right? Because like we tend to put people on pedestals, and they're really like every at the end of the day, everyone is just human. We all have flaws, and so we all have like our inner struggles, and so being like vulnerable with your audience and saying like, yeah, these are the struggles that I had, and these are the things that I discovered, and by the way, I did not know that it worked this way. It's so much more relatable.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Adriana, for the tips. I mean, this was really helpful, because a lot of people have this, imposter syndrome when it comes to conferences and speaking up. So this really helps. I mean, talking more about this. Yeah, so I think like one of the last question which I want to ask you is, because you're very, very senior, not very, because then you're gonna say me, what are you trying to intend? Okay, so someone yeah, so someone like, too much into this industry, and you've seen so many things, because I think you've started your own startup as well, and you know how to basically manage the teams, run the product, run the business. You have seen the world, like from the entrepreneur perspective, from the manager perspective, from the community perspective. I just want to hear your opinion, because it's going to be interesting. Why do you feel, I mean, the gender gap is an issue? And what tips you would suggest to people to bridge this gap? I mean, where did you feel the most that we should not have this much gap in the gender and in the tech industry? So yeah, I would love to hear your views about it.
Yeah, sure. So I think the first time I realized I was a woman in tech was when I was leading a team, and I had this one guy who was like giving me a lot of attitude because he was like older than me, and he was like and he was not digging the fact that like a younger woman was telling him what to do. And he basically complained to my manager, and my manager defended him. And that was like eye opening. And it's funny because like, I have an engineering degree. I've been, working in tech for 20 plus years. I have been in areas surrounded like that are male dominated for so long. And for me, it used to be a point of pride. I'm like, oh, I'm one of the guys. I'm like super, accepted by them. And unfortunately, I feel like in some ways, like I altered my behavior to like gain more acceptance. And then this incident was like, oh my God, I'm a woman in tech and I'm all alone. And that opened my eyes. And ever since then, like I just like I'm so aware of like the little things, that are done to women compared to men. Like I mentioned this thing that happened one time in the workplace. I was like, I was and at this point I was like managing a team. One of my direct reports, he yanks on something on my back, and he's like, "What's that?" And then he realizes it's my bra, because I guess it was sticking out, like, because the t-shirt was tighter, and so you could see the outline. And he's like, "What is that?" And he yanks my friggin' bra, and and I'm like, "What the hell just happened?" And the funny thing is, my male coworkers were more offended by it than I was. That's how blind I was to it. They're like, "This is not okay," and they reported him. And which, like, I'm like, this is awesome that my male coworkers reported him, but like, not awesome that I was like so unfazed by this and was okay with this, and that is not something I would ever be okay with. And so, like, what can you do to bridge the gender gap? Like, hire more friggin' women. Like, one of the things that I pride on in my podcast, yes, I have guys on in my podcast as well, but like, I really try to elevate women on my podcast, because there's like, like, we exist. We exist in tech, and we need to be able to see each other. And I think that's so important. I think in the last, I think what I've really enjoyed about working in the open source community in the last little while, in the last 2 years, is that I have gotten to work with more women in tech, and it is wonderful. And it has allowed me to explore what it means to be a woman again. That sounds so weird, but like, I feel like in some ways I had to like hide my femininity for so long too. And especially like when I was working in an office, and I like to dress up, especially in the summer, like wear a nice dress and sandals and stuff. And I get like these like gross looks from these old dudes, and I'm like, this is not cool. Like, and so, like, you kind of feel the need to suppress it, or whatever, because of that. And it's so, I really appreciate working in the open source community, where there's like a lot more of this openness, and seeing more people who look like me. It's so reinvigorating. Especially, like I mentioned, I'm originally from Brazil. I have not lived in Brazil for a really long time, and yet it's been so cool having a chance in the last little while to connect with other Brazilians in tech, which is something I've like, I have not met too many Brazilians in my life, believe it or not, outside of my extended family. So like, to be able to interact with so many other Brazilians in tech and meet other Brazilian women in tech is so cool to me, because it's like, when people say, oh, it's important to like see others who look like you, I'm like, oh, whatever. But like, no, it really is. It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah, just straight up, like, it
Yeah.
makes you feel inspired.
Yeah, you never know when you until you've been put into that.
Yeah, exactly.
You just never know that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, like, being humble, I think it's, and being able to put yourself in the other shoes, I guess. I guess that could be the first starting point of actually not having this issue of
Yeah.
the gap. So yeah, that's amazing, Edwina. And I mean, because I think I can ask you this question: do you have any suggestions for the managers, I mean, who are managing the teams, the leads? I mean, how can they basically inspire a more diverse and inclusive culture? I mean, what can they do as the leaders?
As a leader, I think making sure that you first of all, give credit where credit is due. Super
Yeah.
important. And especially, like, for women, like, really making sure you're crediting people. I think, some I'm such a fan of that, and I don't see what the big deal is about, like, making sure, like, we are all here because others have done work before us. So give credit where credit is due. If you're and regardless of whether or not you're a man manager, a woman manager, or whatever, or however you identify as, like, really, like, try to grow your people. um
Mm-hmm.
like, be there for them, like, as a mentor, because I think, like, one of the jobs of a manager is to provide, like, direction and mentorship,
Yeah.
um which is different from like becoming best buddies with them, because that can be a slippery slope, because then that can lead to all sorts of problems, because then you feel like when you have to be tough, it feels extra hard when you're having to be tough on your friends. But like providing good direction for your direct reports, I think is really important, and especially like a woman manager managing other women, like really providing that extra bit of support, because we still are on an island. I
Agreed.
and I think that's really the most important thing, because and I've had the experience where I've had like horrible women managers that have undermined me. And it's such a crappy feeling to realize that, and I actually had one where it was like, it was a friend who became my manager. And before, she was like giving me all this advice of like, oh, you should make sure like with your manager, do this, this, and this. And then when she became my manager, it was like, bitch mode. It was like it was like a 180. I'm like, what the hell just happened? I thought we were friends. And so yeah, then that's that slippery slope again with the friends. But like this undermining thing, the gaslighting, like, dude, like, no, we're all friends here. We're all struggling. Like,
Yeah.
just
And that
stop.
really affects. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah.
It's a horrible feeling to feel unsupported by your
By
female manager as a woman. Like, just because,
Mhm.
like, I'm not saying we have to be best buddies, but like, let's try to support each other, because it's hard enough being a woman in tech, like, let's not try to,
Mhm.
like, you
Agree,
know
agree. I mean, being on the other end, Adrina, when you mentioned about the manager part where you, I mean, give the credit part, which you mentioned, and I've been on the other end where where I did not receive that. I mean, there was this one situation where something, because I was like the only women in that team, and for some reason I did put a lot of hard work to get noticed. I did that thing. I mean, I did a lot of extra work, but I never got noticed because there was something like appreciation award or something, and I never got that award. And it was really sad. I mean, for a very long time, I blamed myself that maybe I'm not good enough, maybe I'm this, and I blamed like till the end. And eventually, recently, when I got support of other, amazing people in community, I realized that it was not my issue, it was my manager's issue, that he was not inclusive. I mean, he forgot, maybe he forgot, but it's not his response. I mean, it's his responsibility to remember, right? To make
yeah.
everyone feel give the credit or appreciate for their work. So that's his responsibility or her responsibility as a manager. So yeah, I just wanted to mention this, like being on the other end, it is a pretty bad situation,
Yeah,
bad
it
place to be in.
sucks.
And it sucks, and then you are in this always, the guessing mode. Am I good enough, am I not? And it's just not worth. And that's where I think the open source community comes. I mean, I always felt very appreciated in open source communities for the contribution. That's how it is. So yeah, yeah, that's it, I think. Thank you so much, Adriana. I think these the suggestions which you mentioned were amazing. I mean, now we come to the end. Really learned a lot from you, and I hope other people learn also, and I'm sure they're going to learn a lot from you. In the end, I just would like to mention that if someone wants to reach out to you, do you have some I mean, do you have something where people can reach out to you if they have?
Yeah, and I'll make sure also to send you a link to like
Yeah,
to how to find me on the socials. But I'm on most of the socials. I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn,
yeah,
Mastodon, Blue Sky somewhat, Instagram. And you can so the place to find me on my socials is bento.me, bento.me/Adriana. So ADRIANA MVILLELA. So from there you can find the links to all my socials. You should be able to also find the link to my blog on Medium and also to my podcast. Which
awesome.
Nancy was a guest on, and she was an amazing guest. So watch her episode.
Thank you so much, Adriana. So I'm going to paste all the links in the end in the description for sure. And thank you so much for being an amazing guest. I mean, learned a lot from you. And yeah, so thank you everyone for joining today. Thank you, Adriana, for giving your time. And if you want to meet more amazing women, you can just join Women in Cloud Native Community. You can join the CNCF Slack. We have CNCF-Women group. You can also join the Discord group. Yeah, and you can also watch more podcasts to see more amazing women. So yeah, thank you so much.